Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
Okay, so we are going through Genesis. We were going through the story of Jacob. So we'll turn to Genesis chapter 32, verse 6. I'll pick it up in verse 6, just so that we know where we left off here. When the messengers returned to Jacob, Jacob had sent these messengers out to go to Esau. He had just finished dealing with Laban, and they had made a boundary, each one, and had made an oath with one another to not cross that boundary, to harm each other in any way, or to mess with each other in any way. So now Jacob was heading back to his homeland, and he sent messengers on to Esau. So the messengers had returned at this point in verse 6. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you with 400 men. So, and 400 men are with him." That's a lot of people. Okay? And talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire in this circumstance. How many times in our life are we going to find ourselves and have already found ourselves with things closing in around us on all sides? It seems like that, where the pressure of what we're going through and the adversity of what we're experiencing just absolutely seems overwhelming to us. And we think to ourselves, oh my God, how am I going to get through this? Well, this was happening to Jacob. He just left Laban. His anxiety was through the roof. He was running for his life because his father-in-law was pursuing him and caught up with him. And obviously the party that his father-in-law had was able to do whatever they wished, because Laban had that dream, and he was told during the dream, be careful. Careful what you do to this man, careful what you say to him. So we know that when Jacob was coming into the land, we know that he had a dream, and God told him in that dream, I'm with you, and I will be with you. So anyway, in great fear, verse 7, and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. And he thought to himself, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. He can't wipe out everybody all at once here. So he was strategizing and using his mind to get out of this trouble. Now this is very revealing, and this is what I wanted to draw your attention to, because this is what I was talking about last time, about peering through the cracks, looking through the gap, right? We not only have an account, a written account in front of us, but there are different things that we can evaluate as we are reading it. And this is one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to in verse 9. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, now he's quoting God, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. So he's taking God to account on his promise. I am unworthy of all the kindnesses and faithfulness that you have shown your servant. Again, with his own words, this is a private prayer. He didn't know or had any idea that we would be reading his private words. This was recorded, right? And this is how he legitimately felt. He wasn't saying it for posterity. Okay? I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown your servant. Could we compare ourselves to this man even after what we've already read? My personal answer is no. I couldn't compare myself to him on any level. I'm not as strong as he was. And when I look at what he endured under Laban, working for Laban and working for his wives, this man, to me, was out of my league. That's my own personal opinion. You have to evaluate things for yourself about this man's character. So if we can't compare ourselves to this man, what spirit causes anyone who claims to speak for God, what spirit causes anyone to claim a particular position of authority over others? When this man, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, said, I am unworthy of you. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown me. And we read that before in the preceding chapter. He said, when I came into this land, I came only with my staff. Everything that that I now have belongs to you, and it was given to me by you. So the words reveal a character. And that character is a spiritual map of where this man stood. When you compare this man and his attitude, his spirit, with others who would say that they are somebody when they're really not. You see, that's the difference. Abraham didn't have an attitude that claimed anything. Isaac didn't have an attitude that claimed anything for themselves. Jacob did not have this attitude that claimed anything for himself. So when we bump into a spirit or into words from a man who claims that they're somebody or claims they're going to do something or that God has sent them, really? Has God sent them? You see, this is an identifier, and it's just one of many. But it also is a reflection, and it edifies us and allows us to see what kind of heart God works with. And we're going to learn a lot more here. This is not only just a story. This is a spiritual story. And the spiritual story works alongside of the physical one. Because we're physical, we need to hear a story. A man went to a town, and he bought a donkey, and he rode the donkey back, and he was thrown off the donkey, and he rolled down a hill, and he went into a river, and he hit his head on a rock. These are all components, these are features that our mind links up to. And it creates transition, and it creates a body. It helps us to understand. So this is a factual account. It's a chronology. But there's a spiritual account, working alongside of it, working with it. Obviously, because God's involved with it. So, just a note of interest for you to stop at this point. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown your servant. Again, here he says, I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid that he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said to me, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. So somehow I know you're going to make this work out, but I'm afraid. Please save me, because he's coming with 400 men, and I don't want to feel this way. And I feel like the sides are coming in all around me. And my hope is slipping away from me. But I know you're there. And this is what we need to cling on to. But we won't get there unless we have a similar attitude. It is a matter of the heart. And look at the heart of Jacob on the spiritual mapping of this journey. What did he say? I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy of your faithfulness. When I crossed the Jordan, I had only my staff in my hand. In other words, even now I have two camps, and you've blessed me in such a great way. I still am unworthy. They don't belong to me. He knew. This is the separation here. This is the spiritual separation. between those that are walking with their God and have a fear of him, who God is mindful of and who is working with them, and those that would claim for themselves some kind of authority when really they are nothing. And this ties in to a spiritual lesson that we are well aware of in the New Testament. He who is humble, I will exalt. And he who is exalted or self-exalted, I will humble him. I'll bring him down. That ties right in with that. And you could see this pattern, this spiritual pattern, the spiritual mapping through this narrative. I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray. And he quotes God again, saying, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. He spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. So again, he was trying to still employ the good nature that was in him, but in a tactful way. That ties into the New Testament scripture that calls on us to be as wily as serpents, but as innocent as doves. The scripture all connects. It's the same spirit. So that's what Jacob was applying. He was being wily. Here's some gifts. And he meant it. But he was employing a tactic. But he was innocent. He wasn't doing any aggressive move. He wasn't trying to be deceitful in any way. So we read that he selected a gift for his brother Esau. And then in verse 14, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams. That's huge. 30 female camels and their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. With that stock alone, not only in your possession at that time, you would be rich, but the capacity that you would have at that point to be able to make them and to have more. I mean, you would double or triple your stock within about 5 years with what he was giving you. Because you had the male and the female counterparts. And you had enough females to produce so much more. So he gave him very liberally. That tells you that Jacob also, and we'll see that, also had a heart that was open-ended. Also had a heart that wanted to help others. Also had a heart that wanted to give to people. And he had a deep love. We've seen that when he worked so hard for his wives. And when he didn't separate between Leah and Rebecca, or sorry, Leah and Rachel, he didn't separate between those two. He said, I worked 14 years for my wives. He didn't say to Laban, oh, you screwed me for one wife because it wasn't the one that I wanted. You ejected her into our love. You ejected her into our marriage. Not cool. He didn't say that. He took it. He took it. And he was aware of their feelings too at this point. They were his wives. So he put them in the care of his servants, verse 16. Each herd by itself, and he said to his servants, go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds. Now he's using his mind here, his strategy. He instructed the one in the lead, when my brother Esau meets you and he asks you, why do you belong, or who do you belong to? Where are you going? And who owns all these animals that are in front of you? Then you're to say to him, they belong to your servant, Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. He also instructed the second and the third and all the others who followed the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, I will pacify him, right out front, right in the open. This is what he thought. I will pacify him with these gifts that I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. So here we come to a part, right, where he sent those gifts on ahead, and they were designed to have a certain effect. Don't forget what Esau and Jacob's mother said when she had designed it for Jacob to leave. She had said that Esau's anger would subside. She said that she would call for Jacob. I'll call for you when your brother's anger subsides. Well, that never happened. That didn't go about that way. God Almighty went to Jacob and said, I want you to leave now. After 20 years. After 20 years. And Jacob didn't move until God had commanded it and asked him to leave. Maybe Jacob was praying for relief. Maybe Jacob was praying and saying, I'd like to go back to my mom and dad. Please show me the way. Because I crossed over the Jordan. And I crossed over and you gave me a dream on my journey. What am I to do? I found my wives. I was sent by my father to Laban. I really don't know what to do. I haven't got permission to leave. So that's when God intervened and said, leave. Go back to your father's house. But Jacob's and Esau's mother, who knew her sons, had said, wait there in that land, go see my brother Laban, and wait until I call you. And then when I call you, after your brother's anger subsides. So she knew that was going to happen at some point. That Esau was not one to hold a grudge. And he also was developing. We'll see. We'll see that as we go along here. Verse 22, Jacob wrestles with God. That night, Jacob got up and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, all by himself. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. How bizarre. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Wow. Tells you what Jacob was understanding. Unless you bless me. So whoever he had a hold of it wouldn't let him go. He knew he had the power to bless him. Something very profound happens here. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. What does that mean? What does that mean? When he said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. This account is a spiritual map and a witness to us. Look at this turning point and consider how many times the name Jacob and Israel is mentioned throughout the Bible from this point forward. Think of how often you read it. It's everywhere at that point, like a banner. But look at the character. Because you have struggled with God. What does that mean? And with humans, and have overcome them. That's incredible. That's incredible. And then you look at something that Jacob couldn't even begin to see. What we're looking at in hindsight is an epic. It's a story beyond, with amazing proportions, eternal proportions. Jacob didn't know that. He didn't know what this was going to be. He was long dead when many people were quoting him and quoting his name. He was the father of that nation and the first sign of that promise. when he had so many sons. And each one of those sons became a tribe, as we shall see. This was the flowering of that promise. And it began right here with this man, who was the third in a line of men who had the fear of God. What is the fear of God? What does that mean? That you're afraid of him? No. That everything you do in his sight. He's watching. You don't steal because you know he's looking at you and you say, I don't want to break his law. That's wrong. I know it's wrong, so I won't do it. So you have his attention. He's called you to understand his will. He's called you to understand his purpose. And like I said several weeks ago, and I keep saying it, do you not think that he's mindful of you? I keep asking you, who are you? You see, much like Jacob, you can't be aware of the narrative that's in front of you, what you will live, and where your life will go, what you were meant to do, and who you are. But if you walk like Jacob did, you claim nothing for yourself like Jacob did. You work hard like he did. And when things are pressing in on all sides on you, you pray to God like he did. But you remain steadfast. You overcome like he did. And this overcoming, you'll see in Revelation. Jesus Christ says, to the one who overcomes, I will give him. And then lists a bunch of stuff. You can read it for yourself. This overcoming is key. And this personality type that overcomes seems to be underwritten in the very nature of those that God has called, truly called. Those that are responding to that call because their hearts were called and their hearts are open to his voice and they want to do what's right before him. And they want to put away things that stand in the way. They want to overcome. That's huge. Jacob didn't know what the future held. Jacob knew what God promised, but Jacob had no idea, couldn't imagine the perspective that we have today reading this, looking back at it, reading his prayers, and being able to weigh his character and compare it to our own. You have overcome. You have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. God tests us. He tests our faith. He did with Job. I'm sure he did with Moses. I can be guaranteed that if this is a pattern, he did it with everyone that he called his own. He's going to test us. He tested Jacob. He tested Isaac. He tested Abraham. He's going to test us. And we need to struggle. We need to appeal to him. And we need to remind him of his promises. He wants personality. He wants character. That's what Jacob did. Don't believe me. That's what we read. You promised me. You said my seed would be as many as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. He knows that there's an inevitability here because God promised it. And he's reminding God of that. And the man said, your name will no longer be Israel. So that's Jacob will be Israel. So Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. So he knows who he wrestled with. That's why he said, I'm not letting you go unless you bless me. And Jacob asked him for his name. This was very personal. And again, Jacob recanted that personal effect. I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. Yeah. So the sun rose above, in verse 31, him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, The Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So verse 33, chapter 33, verse 1. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men, and he panicked. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. And he put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Kind of tells you something there, doesn't it? He himself went on ahead, and he bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around him, around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Why did Esau come with 400 men? Well, the servants that reported it, they kind of got the feeling, we're in trouble. As soon as Jacob heard of it, he kind of got the feeling, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Why would Esau need 400 men to go meet Jacob? Who knows? The Bible's not very clear as to why. But normally in our history, which is really the only place that we could extract a comparison, when you bring 400 men, it's usually because you need them, or you want to be overwhelming. It sounds like Esau was doing very well in that land if he had 400 men with him that were under his guidance. He was the boss. Sounds like he was doing well and he was prosperous. And we find out later while we're reading that that was the case. It was after the first contact from the messengers that were sent by Jacob that Esau had this reaction. He mounted up and he headed out with 400 men. One thing though, when Esau came and he embraced his brother, and the one thing that might have stuck in his heart was his awareness of how he displeased his father. And we'll have a look at that in Genesis 28, because it's very pertinent. And we'll start in verse 6 of Genesis 28. Now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there. And that he blessed him, and that when he blessed him, he commanded him, while he was blessing him, do not marry a Canaanite woman. And he also learned that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother. Wow. And he had gone, as he was told to Paddan Aram. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. You don't realize things if your heart isn't open to realize them. If you think that there's nothing wrong with you and you're not doing anything wrong and you're fine. You don't realize things if you don't have a decent heart that's open to be able to realize them. Well, it says here, Esau, as a result of Jacob's example of being told to leave the land, of being commanded by their father, do not marry a Canaanite woman, and then in combination with that, Jacob obeyed him, leaving that example. So he realized then how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. He didn't know that before. And he went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth, and daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives that he already had. Right? Now there's some reference in Hebrews. I don't want to be flipping into Hebrews just at this point in this series. But there is reference in Hebrews as to what also was very displeasing about Esau, was that he was immoral and that he was a womanizer. And you look at Jacob, He had no wives. He was told, you're going to get your wife from here. He said, okay. And then he was told to leave, and he left. And it left such an impression on his brother that he obeyed his parents. You have a lot of things working here in the writing that you could see. You could see Jacob's obedience. And you could see how grievous it was for Isaac to have his oldest son and his heir marry Canaanite women. We also could see the spiritual connection of exactly how important it was to have proper women that had a proper belief system. That was the biggest problem that they had with the Canaanite women, was their belief system. And that same belief system the Israelites encountered many years later when they were liberated and emancipated from Egypt and came back through that way, and God told them to wipe them all out, lest you be enticed to their gods. When you're raising kids and you have a family, the women play a big part in what those children are going to believe. If they're going to believe anything. Because the children, when they're little and most impressionable, spend more time traditionally with their moms. And if you have, and you know this, if you have a woman that has a strong faith and a strong disposition, she's going to impart that on her kids. That is going to be carried by them for the rest of their life. I don't care what religion you were. That's going to be carried. I've seen it. So the woman plays a big part in what the children are going to believe. They are key. And obviously, Isaac and even Abraham. Abraham sent his servant away to get a wife for Isaac. So the wife's a big deal. But I digress. Esau had the heart to be able to see. He loved his dad, and he's seen how it grieved his father. So Esau's heart was open to change. And we could see here that a man who was conspiring to kill his brother, and so seriously so, that the mother of them both saved the younger one, because she knew the older brother's coming for you. As soon as the father dies, he's gonna fulfill what he said he's gonna do. She knew her son. And yet we see a complete change of heart here. You know, when they meet up. Well, when Esau realized that, so much so that he went and took a wife that was somewhat related back to the source, Abraham, from Ishmael's daughter, he took action. He wanted to please. He wanted to do something. He wanted to change. I'm not getting into Esau, but I'm saying there are key factors here that sometimes we can overlook, and they play a part in the storyline, and they are pertinent. So Esau ran. He ran to meet someone that he had swore he was going to kill. So whatever happened to Esau at this point, we know that he was prosperous, and we know that he had a change of heart. And we know, based on the storyline before that, that he loved his father, and he was aware now that his father was grieved by his choices. And he even took action to try to make some kind of amends for those choices. So Esau, you know, he had some ingredients here. And he ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him, and he threw his arms around him, around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. When Esau looked up and he saw the women and the children, he asked them, "Who are these with you?" Jacob answered, "They are the children that God has graciously given your servant." Again, very humble attitude. Then the female servants and their children approached, and they bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. And last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Now notice how it names Joseph. The female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Verse 7, next Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, right, came Joseph, mentioned first, not his mom, and Rachel. And Rachel and Joseph were behind the last part of the column, the last part that could be affected. That was Joseph's choice. Or sorry, it was Jacob's choice, just as it was his choice in the beginning to follow on with her. because that's who he loved. He never asked for Leah, but he remained married to her, and he gave her children, and he was a husband to her. So Joseph and Rachel. Joseph is clearly mentioned here. None of the other kids are. Esau asked, "What is the meaning of all these flocks and herds that I met along the way?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "You know what? I already have plenty, my brother." So he was exceedingly blessed. At this point, probably more than Jacob, because he had 400 men that he just took with him. In an aggressive posture at first. At least that's how it was perceived. "So I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. And now that you have received me favorably, please accept the present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, I would say so strongly, Esau accepted it. Then Jacob said, "Let us be on our way, and I'll accompany you." Now there is another point of interest here. Jacob said, "I don't need your gifts. I have more than enough." So these gifts that Jacob was sending on ahead of him, they really didn't have a huge value to Esau, because he already had a lot. So the full effect that Jacob wanted to accomplish by sending these gifts ahead didn't resonate the same way that Jacob had hoped that they would, outside of maybe being just a gracious offering to a man who already had more than he could ever want, and even told Jacob, "Look, I already got too much. I don't need that stuff." And Jacob said, No, take more. Take it from me. These are gifts." So then Esau said, "Let us be on our way, and I'll accompany you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and the cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard, even just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and the herds before me, and the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." "But why do that?" Jacob asked. "Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So that day, Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself, and he made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Paddan-aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, and he camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar, and he called it El Eloh Israel. Now, we've seen through this wording, especially with Jacob's prayer, especially when he met his brother Esau, and especially when he left Laban and they had this exchange between one another. We've seen, especially with Laban, his father-in-law, and the discussion between them, it had revealed so much about Jacob's character. Jacob wrestled and found favor with God and men because he overcame. This is a physical record of peoples and the events of their life, of course. And it is the chronological record of the first generations to build a nation that was chosen to bring about the greatest blessing through God's decision to come into the world through this very lineage. God decided this. And Abraham was well aware of that. Heck, even Adam and Eve were well aware of it. Our God, who was born through this physical bloodline, had come to his own creation, only to be rejected by his own. And he should have at least called him brother, just by his own birthright, having his mother's lineage and his father's lineage coming directly from the line of David. And you could trace that line back from David to Moses, to Jacob, to Isaac, to Abraham, to Noah, to Adam, all the way. I ask you again, who are we? And this is the beautiful part of it. A black man could ask himself, and an Asian man could ask himself, what do I got to do with this story? What does it matter to me? It matters a lot. It's not only a physical record, but it is a spiritual record. In Exodus 3, chapter 3, verse 6, you don't have to turn there. I just wanted to reference it. This is when the Almighty was revealing himself to Moses, and he was revealing himself to Moses in a very unique way, as I've said a few weeks ago. And in chapter 3, verse 6, he says, then he said, I am the God of your father. Wow. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, once he said this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. He knew who was talking to him. Once he had said this. And this same banner, the same motif is through the whole Bible. Once Moses heard that, he knew to whom he was speaking. And the beautiful thing about Moses is he said, I revealed myself to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and I am their God. And I revealed myself to them as their God, but I did not reveal myself as the Lord. And this is the turning point. It was a wonderful turning point. And you can't see that turning point unless you know the story. Because each one is linking up with the next piece of the story. You'll find that we're reading of ancient narrative with a spiritual mapping. And that same spiritual mapping and that same narrative includes us in the future. And we don't realize it. We don't realize it. You will. By the time I'm done this series, the next couple of Sabbaths, you realize the relevance. We're just getting into it. We were just starting to get into it last time. Peering through the gap, looking through the cracks at the character, and evaluating and learning the difference between the spirits. What does the scripture say? Test the spirits. Test them to see where they come from, to see if they be from the Almighty. This is not only a physical record, but a spiritual record, as I said. This is something that a carnal mind cannot discern. They just look at it as a story, and probably a very boring one. Until God opens their mind and they start to see, okay, and they start to ask questions. And usually those questions start with criticisms. And that's fine. It's okay to ask questions. He put his name beside theirs, these three men, because he was joined with them in the spirit. And their conduct and their decisions that we are reading about reflected their surrender. It mirrored it. You could see it. I'm unworthy. All I had was my staff. They surrendered. And it was a testimony of the two spirits God's Spirit, and our own individual spirit, which perishes. It's not immortal. But when it's combined with God's Spirit, it is something else. Romans 8. We get a way better understanding of it. And we will get into some of this later. As we close this out here. Romans chapter 8. We'll start in verse 12. Therefore, brothers, Paul is talking here. And therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the flesh, to live according to it. What does that mean? We can't be ingratiating ourselves all the time and tickling our fancy. This is not what our existence is about. Now that we are called, now that we've been endowed with the Spirit, and now that we are compelled to come forward and build character, we have an obligation. For if you live according to your flesh, you will die. This is the part of our self-determination as beings, and our self-will, and our ability to make decisions, whether they are right, whether they are wrong. But the result of making these wrong decisions and living only a fleshy existence, living just at the capacity of that terminal existence as a human being, will it bring about exactly that. We get old. You will die. And then you're done. This is all living for the flesh holds the promise of. And we've seen so many of our generations come and go in this state. They lived their lives. They had families. They didn't know any better. Some of them lived a really good life. And they tried to do the best they can, but they died. What it's saying here is something very different. It's giving you something to latch onto in your understanding of the way things are by the pattern of your life and what you've learned as you've come along. Listen. For if you live according to the flesh, if you make this decision, you will die. But if, by the Spirit that's been placed in you, you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Now that's a mystery to the carnal mind. But if you're called and you have a Spirit, your mind should be open to the capacity of what this means. You will live. If you put to death the misdeeds of the body, so it gives you the very fact and fundamentals that the craving of the flesh is only misdeeds. It doesn't usually lead to wholesome things. So if you fight that, remember what God said after he finished wrestling with Jacob. Because you struggled with God and men and have overcome them, now we're not only called to do both of those things, but we're also called, just as much as they were, to discipline ourselves. You look at what Jacob said to Laban. I never ate any of your rams out in the field, which would have been my food because I'm looking after your and my flocks simultaneously. But I never ate any of your stuff, and you wouldn't have known any better. He made a decision to walk straight. He made a decision to subdue himself. And you could see, sleep did not come to his eyes. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. So there's a different capacity now for us. It doesn't just reside with our human lives. There's more to it now with us. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you receive does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Remember the walls closing in on your life, remembering you not knowing what you're going to do to handle it. Well, you won't fear again, because you know the end of the matter. and you have faith. Rather, the Spirit that you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. It is that Spirit now that is available because of Christ's sacrifice. And he said it very plainly to them. I'm going where I am going, and unless I go, I can't send you the Helper. But when the Helper comes, he will guide you and he will show you into all things. And he will remind you of what I've said. This Spirit can reside in, it's not a fleshy thing. Yes, the Messiah was born of this lineage. And you can see the men that went in to make up this lineage had the same spirit, the same heart. But after Christ came, not only was it now open to those who were children of the house, but to those that were in the neighborhood and all over the world. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, it didn't matter. Once that Spirit was dwelling in you, that is your adoption to sonship. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit. This is the point I wanted to get to. That we are God's children. Period. This is what's in front of us. This is the capacity. Now, if we're children, then we are heirs. Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings. So we master our own bodies. We no longer live for the flesh. We present our bodies as a living sacrifice, ready to be poured out, if that is what's required. But pouring out all of those desires and all of those wicked misdeeds that our flesh usually finds us and winds up making us do. Because that is the process. That is by the only real means that we can be tempted. When we don't satisfy the desires of the body any longer, and we have a focal point on that which remains constant, it's not on the metaphysical plane, then that is feeding us. We're feeding a side of us that's going to give us real life, because we've been endowed with a portion of God's Holy Spirit that combines with our own individuality to make the right decisions or the wrong ones. It's up to you. But if you make the right ones, all of these components line up, and you will be tested. We are tested every day. That's why we need each other so bad, because we do walk as foreigners in this world. When you see one of your own, or one that you're familiar with, in a maze, and in a mass of those that are not familiar and don't have the same spirit and do not have the same goal, that's a very precious thing. No wonder the Bible has a prerequisite that you must love your brother. Because it's a sonship. It's a signature of your own family. And if you can't recognize your own family, then how do you recognize the father of it? You can't. And you won't. You're fooling yourself. This is why there's a constant reference back to this very record throughout the scriptures. This motif produces a spiritual banner, and it is a mystery to the world. But it's not a mystery to you. You know. And we read in Acts 3 in closing. Just a couple more scriptures here. Acts chapter 3. Still trying to get used to this new Bible. And verse 12. New Bible, old Bible. Acts chapter 3, verse 12. Actually, we'll back it up to verse 11. While the man held on to Peter and John, all the people were astonished. This was after basically the first miracle that we are aware of. After Christ after Christ was crucified. So all the people were astonished, and they came running to them in the place called Solomon's Colonnade. When Peter saw this, he said to them, "Fellow Israelites, why does this surprise you? Why do you stare at us as if by our own power or some kind of godliness that we had made this man walk? No. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, has glorified his servant Jesus. You handed him over to be killed, and you disowned him before Pilate with your own mouths. But Pilate finally said, 'What should I do with him?' And you guys said, 'Crucify him.' And even Pilate, this Gentile governor, said, 'Well, then let his blood be on your heads, because I find no basis for a charge against him.' And you said, 'Yes, let it be on our heads and on our children's heads.'" They knew what they said. "You handed him over to be killed, and you disowned him before Pilate, one of your own. Though he had decided to let him go. Pilate wanted to let him go. You disowned the holy and righteous one and asked that a murderer, Barabbas, be released to you." You asked for this. "You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead. We are witnesses of this. By faith in the name of Jesus, this man whom you see and now was made strong, it is Jesus' name and the faith that comes through him that has completely healed him, as you can all see clearly." Matthew 22. And that's what he invoked right away, before he added to them the guilt of their decisions. And when you read this for yourself at home and you finish off what this story was about here, they were absolutely shocked to the heart. They were grieved. They were so grieved, they said publicly aloud one to another. Peter had just shocked them so hard with the Spirit. That Spirit that cuts right through bone and flesh. They said to each other, "Well, what are we going to do? What do we do? He's dead. He's done." And then Peter brought them forward. 3,000, I believe. Read it for yourself. Believe me. 3,000 of them were added to their number in a single day. Talk about power. So right at closing here, yeah, because it's time. In chapter 22, these are now the words of Jesus. And a few weeks ago, when I started off the shepherd's voice, and I will continue that at some point, his words are very important. We need to pay extra special attention to the words of our Lord. Never mind anybody else. If you only pay attention to his word, just as his disciples did. So Matthew 22 and verse 29. They were having a debate. "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God." He was saying this to religious experts and lawyers, experts with the law. "You do not know the scriptures or the power of God." So he had their attention. At the resurrection, they were trying to trap Christ publicly. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. Right? So they'll be, I don't know, what's the word, androgynous, they'll be sexless. They won't be male or female. Right? So much for angels marrying the Ephraim and having people that juggle and all this weird stuff that people come up with. The Bible clearly says angels aren't given in marriage. They don't have sex. They're not physical beings. They're spiritual beings. Just figured I'd drop that in there. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? Wow. Have you not read? He just finished telling them, you don't know the scriptures. Now he's telling them, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. They were astonished. Because he was the Word. He is the Word. Anyway, we'll pick it up next week. Hopefully over the next couple of Sabbaths we can close this up. But I'll tell you, the next couple of sermons are going to be very revealing. Thank you.